Every morning, before the sun climbed above the ridge, Frank pushed open the heavy metal doors of the old garage off Route 17. The hinges creaked, as they always did, and the smell inside, a mix of motor oil, rust, and damp concrete, welcomed him like a tired friend. He didn't rush. He never did. Frank moved at the same pace each day, slow, steady, like someone who had long stopped expecting anything new. The town had changed, but the garage hadn't. Once it had been busy, travelers breaking down halfway between two bigger cities, locals needing quick fixes. Now, most people had newer cars, better roads, or just went elsewhere. Frank didn't advertise. He didn't even have a website, just a faded hand-painted sign that read, "Service while you wait," and a rusting Coca-Cola machine that hadn't worked in years. By 7 o'clock a.m., he had the lights on, the coffee brewing in the old pot that burned everything past the first hour, and the tools laid out in neat rows on the workbench. He always checked the same things first: pressure in the air compressor, fluid levels in the wash station, battery on the tow truck, even though the tow truck hadn't moved in weeks. Lunch was a sandwich if he remembered to pack one. Dinner was usually noodles from a foam cup slurped quietly at a folding table in the back room. That room, technically a supply closet, doubled as his living quarters. A single bed, metal frame, a mini fridge, a ceiling fan that clicked in a slow, offbeat rhythm like a broken metronome. He kept a radio by the bed, always tuned to the same jazz station. The saxophone helped him sleep. Customers came sporadically, mostly locals who didn't mind waiting. Frank worked without conversation, unless someone needed to be told how long it would take or how much it would cost. He never haggled, never charged more than necessary. Some people liked that. Others took advantage. Either way, he kept working. The debts had piled up, not because he was careless, but because life had grown more expensive than his skills could keep up with. A red notice from the utility company had been taped to the door last week. Today, a second envelope joined it. This one from a loan office with a name he didn't recognize. Frank peeled it off gently, folded it in half, and tucked it into his back pocket. No swearing, no sighs, just silence. In the far left corner of the garage sat a broken wooden chair. One leg splintered, the seat worn smooth. Dust gathered on the armrest, but Frank never moved it, never used it either. When asked, he'd just say, "She said she'd come back for it," and move on. No one asked twice. That evening, rain began to fall just as he closed the big doors. The kind of rain that didn't ease in, just arrived with full weight. He sat at his table, spoon turning slowly in the cup of noodles, steam fogging his glasses. The fan above made its usual ticking sound. Outside, thunder rolled. Then came the screech of tires on wet pavement. Frank stood, slowly, wiping his hands on a rag already stained with grease. Through the front window, headlights blurred behind sheets of rain. A white car. No, not just white. White with ribbons, with flowers, tucked into the grill. A wedding car. The passenger door opened. A figure stepped out. A girl. Soaked, trembling, in a wedding dress, her face pale, her hands shaking, and she was walking toward the garage. She didn't knock. She didn't explain. Just stood there, soaked and shaking, as if waiting for permission to fall apart. That night, Frank didn't ask questions. The girl stood just inside the door, hair plastered to her cheeks, dress clinging to her legs like paper. He handed her a towel, a flannel blanket from the back, and pointed toward the small utility sink near the side wall. He turned away while she scrubbed her hands and face under hot water. The white of her dress slowly turned gray at the hem, where it touched the garage floor. She didn't say much. Just, "Emily." He nodded once. "Frank." That was all. He made her a cup of instant noodles, cracked 2 packets of saltines, and poured her a mug of weak coffee. She took it without a word. Her hands were trembling too much to eat at first, so he set a space heater beside her and went to clean up his tools. It was the quietest night he could remember. No radio, no fan, just the drip of rain from the eaves and the soft rustle of a wedding dress drying beside a workbench. Emily didn't cry. She just sat on the old stool near the corner and wrapped herself in the blanket, like she was trying to disappear inside it. Frank rolled out a second cot in the storage room, put a clean sheet on it, and left the door open a crack. She followed silently. In the morning, she was still there, hair brushed back, face pale but calmer. She folded the blanket neatly, washed the mug and bowl she'd used, and whispered a soft thank you before disappearing behind the rows of old tires stacked near the garage entrance. He assumed she'd left. She hadn't. He found her again an hour later, crouched behind the oil drum, shivering. She hadn't known where to go. Frank didn't ask why. He simply moved the folding chair closer to the heater and made another cup of noodles. She ate this one slower. By noon, the whispers had begun. The garage had two neighbors, an antique shop and a sandwich counter, both run by women who had seen the wedding car the night before. The moment Emily stepped out back to use the restroom, a voice rang out across the alley. "Frank's hiding someone's bride," another answered. "Did you hear? He picked her up in her wedding dress. She was running." Someone else chimed in later at the grocery. "I bet she ran off with him. Always figured there was something off about that man." By the next morning, the whispers had teeth. A group of townspeople arrived outside the garage just after 9. 3 men, 2 women, faces Frank had seen for years but never spoken much with. They came without knocking. "You need to let her go, Frank. She's someone's wife. You're making the whole town look bad." Frank stood behind the counter, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He didn't say a word. "She's not yours to keep," one man spat. "She's just a confused girl," a woman added, louder than necessary. "You're taking advantage." Frank looked past them, out toward the road. "She came here on her own," he said quietly, but no one was listening. The owner of the antique shop stepped forward. "This place has been falling apart for years. Now you bring scandal into it? What's next? Drugs? Trafficking?" She smirked. "Maybe the county needs to pay you a visit." Someone in the back mentioned the police. Another mentioned the mayor. Emily backed up slowly, eyes wide, one hand clutching the edge of the workbench like it might hold her steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then turned and ran. The sun was brutal that afternoon. The blacktop steamed under the August heat. Emily ran without shoes, clutching the blanket in one hand and the hem of her dress in the other. She crossed the lot and disappeared down the side of the highway without looking back. Frank stood in the open garage, arms still folded. The townspeople lingered a moment longer, then dispersed. Satisfied or bored, it was hard to tell. Inside, a cup of coffee went cold. The blanket was gone, the second mug washed and left upside down on the rack. But on the folding chair, the one with the splintered leg, something small remained. A handkerchief. White cotton. Soft, embroidered at one corner with tiny blue flowers. And in the corner, written in small, tidy cursive, "Thank you. I'll be back if I can." Frank picked it up carefully, holding it between fingers still stained with oil. He stared at the words a long time. Then he folded it in half and placed it in the top drawer of the workbench, beneath a roll of electrical tape and a rusted pair of needle-nose pliers. He didn't mention her again. The next day, he swept the floor twice. There were footprints in the dust he didn't try to erase. He patched the broken chair with new wood, then left it in the same spot, facing the garage door. In the days that followed, no one asked about Emily. The townspeople moved on to newer stories, fresher targets. The antique dealer brought up property values. The sandwich shop raised its prices. Frank kept the garage open. He changed nothing. He said nothing. But each evening when the sky turned red and the road shimmered with heat, he paused just for a second by the workbench. His hand would rest for a moment on the drawer that held the handkerchief, not to check if it was still there, but because some part of him still waited. Then he'd sigh, quiet, almost imperceptible, and go back to work. The week passed without mention of Emily, but sometimes Frank thought he still heard the rustle of a dress near the workbench when the wind blew just right. No more visits from townspeople, no more rumors in the alley, just the hum of machinery, the hiss of air hoses, and the steady ticking of the fan in Frank's room. On Thursday, just after midday, Frank spotted something odd on the shoulder of the highway across from the garage. At first, it looked like a pile of clothes slumped beside a rusted sedan, but when he squinted, wiping the grease from his hands on a rag, he saw it was a man, gray-haired, knees drawn up, sitting in the shadow of a broken hood. Frank crossed the road without grabbing his keys, just a thermos in one hand and the rag still looped through his back pocket. The man was maybe in his 70s, hunched beneath a threadbare coat that looked 2 sizes too big. His car was a disaster. Radiator blown, battery dead, one tire cracked along the rim. He didn't look up when Frank approached. "Need a hand?" Frank asked. The old man blinked slowly. "If you got one to spare." No phone, no wallet, just a name, Walter, and a mumbled story about trying to visit his daughter 2 towns over before the car gave out. Frank didn't ask his name again, just opened the trunk, found a tire iron, and got to work. The spare was flat too, so he jogged back to the garage, filled one from the scrap pile and hauled it across. It took nearly an hour to get everything running just well enough to move. Then he pointed to the open bay door. "Come rest," Frank said. Walter hesitated, then nodded. They sat in the cool of the garage, the fan overhead turning slow circles. Frank poured coffee into a chipped mug, handed it to the old man without a word. There was a leftover slice of lemon cake wrapped in wax paper on the workbench. Frank unwrapped it and left it on a napkin between them. Walter picked at it like he hadn't eaten since morning. No one drove by. No one saw. Walter finished the coffee, then stood with a soft grunt, stretching his legs. "You didn't have to," he said. Frank shrugged. "Figured I did." The old man reached for the door, then paused. "You still got a good heart," he said. "Don't let it dry out." Then he walked back across the road, got in his barely working car, and drove off at 15 miles an hour. Frank watched until the sedan disappeared behind a hill, then returned to the workbench. He wrapped the rest of the cake, folded the napkin, and left it near the corner, next to the patched wooden chair. The chair still faced the open garage door. Its leg had been glued, sanded, reinforced. It was steadier now, but Frank hadn't sat in it. He never did. Still, he wiped it every few days, kept the dust off the seat. That afternoon, he moved it just a little, so the sun wouldn't fall directly on it come evening. No one noticed. The days fell into a rhythm again. Quiet repairs. Fewer customers. Frank stopped expecting anything to change. But the walls creaked more in the wind now, and the floor near the shelves held a dark growing crack. By late October, the cold came early. Wind slid under the bay doors, no matter how tightly Frank sealed them, and the heater in the back room groaned more than it warmed. The roof had begun to leak, first in the far corner over the shelves, then above the office desk, where invoices were still stacked from 3 months ago. That morning, a silver car pulled into the lot. The man who stepped out wasn't local. Slacks clipboard, state-issued badge. Frank didn't look surprised. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked out to meet him. "Routine inspection," the man said. "We've had reports of structural issues, faulty wiring, unsafe load-bearing equipment." Frank nodded once, already knowing. The man walked through, checked things with a practiced eye. He tapped the fuse box, took photos of the ceiling beams, noted down the corrosion along the floor jack. "You're out of code on 4 counts, he said finally. "If it's not corrected in 30 days, you'll be shut down." Frank didn't argue. He signed the paper, folded it, and slid it into his back pocket with the rest of the quiet defeats. That evening, he began sorting the tools. The newer ones he packed in milk crates. The rusted wrenches he lined up on the bench and oiled carefully before wrapping them in cloth. The drawers grew emptier, the shelves barer. It was like watching a body shrink inside its skin, and yet no one noticed it dying. He didn't mention anything to the regulars, not that there were many. No one asked why the place looked quieter. The garage had always been a little dusty, a little dim. Now it was just finishing. On the fourth night, he was wiping down the folding table when something slipped from beneath the napkin dispenser, a small square of fabric, soft and worn. He stared at it. The handkerchief. The embroidered flowers were faded now, like ink left too long in the sun. But the stitching, those tiny blue petals, that little green vine, remained. Still whole. Still hers. Frank didn't remember putting it there, but maybe he had. Maybe he'd needed it to stay close. He folded it carefully, not quickly, and pressed it flat beneath his palm. For the first time since she left, he sat in the patched chair. It didn't creak, just opened its arms like it had been waiting. Outside, a breeze lifted the edge of the tarp covering the junk pile. Something flickered. An engine belt caught the light like a snake's back. He didn't move to fix it, just stayed there, one hand resting on the fabric. Then came the headlights. A truck. Big clean, too new for this part of town. It rolled into the lot without sound except for the crunch of gravel under the tires. A man stepped out. Middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't speak, didn't even look long. Just placed something wrapped in brown paper on the ground, nodded once, and turned back to his truck. Frank opened the garage door halfway. "You leave something?" The man paused at the door. His face was hard to see. "Just told to drop it off," the man said, almost like he didn't know who sent it either. Then he was gone. Tail lights fading into the dark, the quiet returning like water closing over a drop stone. Frank waited a moment, then bent to pick up the package. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, rolled blueprints, neatly marked with measurements and notations. A sealed envelope labeled "License." A thick stack of bills, bound with a rubber band. And a note. Just one line, written in familiar, careful cursive. "Don't fold the chair. The person who sat there still remembers." Frank stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was slightly different, older, steadier. But it carried something else, something he recognized. Not the pen, the pause, the way someone writes when they mean it. He looked up at the empty road, then back at the chair, sitting slightly askew, as if waiting to be moved back into place. He didn't move it, but that night he didn't turn off the garage light. He never asked who left the package. He just got to work. When the man asked how he was paying for it all, Frank just pointed to the envelope on the desk. He didn't say whose name was on it. There wasn't one. He replaced the cracked windows, oiled the garage door tracks until they slid smooth, and painted the outside. Same color, just cleaner. He left the sign alone. It still read, "Service while you wait," in faded white paint. Somehow that felt like the only part that didn't need changing. Frank didn't expect anything more. He just worked. Then about a month later the phone rang. It hardly ever did anymore. He let it go to voicemail out of habit, but then curiosity made him play the message back. A calm voice, young, professional, explained they were calling from a new nonprofit based 2 counties over. They had heard about his garage through unofficial channels and wanted to set up a monthly contract, standard maintenance for their fleet of volunteer vehicles. Paid up front, well above market rate. Frank called back. The woman on the other end said she'd send the details by courier. A few days later, the envelope arrived. Printed documents, routing forms, and a short note at the top, typed on crisp paper. This fund was created for those who work quietly, fix things no one else sees, and never ask for thanks. There was no signature. He read the letter twice, then again. He'd seen dozens of letters in his time. None of them made him stop halfway through the second line. But what caught him wasn't the message. It was the way the margins were aligned, the way the letter folded so evenly, no creases misaligned, and then the second envelope, smaller, handwritten, inside, a card. "Frank, I was saved by someone who didn't care who I was. I want to do the same for others. You were the first. Thank you, Emily." He sat there at the workbench for a long time. The fan overhead spun slowly. Outside, the autumn leaves were coming down, collecting in soft piles against the bay door. He didn't cry, but he reached up once, like to rub his brow, and paused, hand trembling in the air. It made sense now. The money, the license. The man in the cap who had only said, "Just passing it on." Emily had sent him. He didn't know where she'd gone after she left the garage. But wherever she'd ended up, she hadn't forgotten. She'd taken what little she had and built something that looked like her own version of justice. Quiet, clean, enough to help people like him stay open a little longer. She didn't come back to say it in person, but she didn't have to. The chair was still there. The handkerchief still folded in the drawer. The patch of floor where she'd once stood, barefoot, shaking, soaked from the rain, was now warmed by the sunlight that slanted through the new window glass. The next week, the first nonprofit van arrived. Frank worked on it like he did every other car. No one took pictures. No one interviewed him. When the volunteer driver asked if he needed anything else, Frank just shook his head and said, "Just come back when it's due." That night, he stayed in the garage a little later. He took the chair, now sturdier than ever, and moved it to the front corner, right near the space where customers waited. He didn't put a sign on it. But beside it, he placed a clean napkin. And on the napkin, he laid a wrapped piece of lemon cake. No name, no label. Just there, like memory made solid, waiting quietly, like he once did. Frank sat on the chair near the front window, the same one she once refused to fold, once splintered, now sturdy. Its silence matched his own. He looked out over the garage, not new, not flashy, but whole. The walls had fresh paint, the roof no longer leaked, and the windows let in soft afternoon light. There were no banners, no signs that read, "Donations welcome," or "Thank you to our supporters." No photos of smiling volunteers, just tools, clean and ordered. Machines, humming and ready. On the far wall, above the bench where he kept his older tools, hung a single frame. Inside it, the handkerchief. Still creased at the corners, the flowers faded but intact. Beneath it, a strip of paper. Handwritten, small, barely legible if you weren't looking for it. Frank's bench, where kindness waits. He didn't say who it was for, but he always glanced at it once before opening the door each morning. He never told anyone who wrote it, never corrected the few customers who asked. Most didn't notice. Some just smiled and sat nearby, without asking why. Frank didn't think of himself as generous. He didn't think of Emily as someone who owed him anything. He just knew, on one rainy night, she had come in shaking, and he had made space. And somehow, that small gesture had looped its way through time and come back changed. Not loud, not proud, just enough. And sometimes, just enough is everything. There are kind acts no one needs to see, but they still touch the hearts of those who need them. And maybe that's enough. If you've ever met someone like that in your life, or you've quietly done something good for someone else, leave a heart below. Who knows, your story might be the one that helps someone believe again. Or maybe, just send this to someone who makes you think they deserve more love than the world ever gave them.